I'm being told by Allison, if I don't start exactly right now at 5 o'clock, that JASA might never come back to Japan Society. So I don't want that to happen. I'm Joshua Walker, president here of Japan Society. It is great to have you here. It's the first day of spring. It doesn't quite feel that way outside, but I assure you that it did over the weekend, and it's just great to have everyone here. My job is to simply say thank you for being here. I think in a moment in which it's clear that Japan has arrived in a very significant way, the work you all do and the champions that you are of Japanese art has never been more timely. I hope you got a chance to check out the show that we're currently featuring with Zenga. It seems very appropriate with the lecture we're going to hear today, and with our good friends Kurt and Alice, who are here as well. So I hope you get a chance to check out that. I'm really looking forward to hearing and learning from you all. But my job in many ways is to simply tell you that Japan House has always been your house. Thank you for letting me be here and to learn from all of you. I'm looking forward to learning, but there's actually a very particular member of our group that really we are so excited to have. She's not only one of us, she's someone that we're very excited with her energy. And as a matter of fact, she's actually on her way to Japan tonight. And I can't think of a more fitting send-off for Dr. Michelle Bambling, who I want to introduce as the new Japan House Gallery. So without further ado, let me have Michelle come up here and welcome you all.
Good evening, a very, very warm welcome to all of you. It's so exciting for me to be able to welcome you here, as I've just joined last month, and I'm thrilled to be here. I've had the chance, because it's Asia Week, to speak with many of you, and I can't wait to meet more of you, talk to you about your ideas for Japanese art, the ambitions for the gallery moving forward, building on a great legacy here. And it's true, I'm going to Japan tonight, right after this meeting, but I am staying for Frank's talk. I'm looking forward to hearing it and to talk to all of you afterwards at the reception. And so I know this is a JASA event, but I want to say that it's exciting to know that you all have chosen to host your annual meeting here at the Japan Society. It's really important to us, and we look forward to our continued ongoing relationship together. And I don't want to take too much time, but I did want to say hello. And the other thing I'm very excited about is that the very first exhibition to open while I join is the Gitter Yellen collection of Zenga. It's a fabulous exhibition. I know you all just saw the exhibition, and I got the very wonderful opportunity to meet Alice and Kurt when I was doing my dissertation research in Japan some years ago. And I admired them from the beginning of our encounter, and their collection is so important. It's grown over the years, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to have this focused exhibition on Zenga. And to that, I would like to say welcome, thank you, and invite Amy Foster to come up on stage. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Today, we are continuing the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Japanese Art Society of America. And what better way than to meet in person and on Zoom to bring our members together from all over the country. We are especially happy to thank Michelle Bambling and the Japan Society for joining us to host this program this afternoon, and to visit the wonderful special exhibition here at Japan Society Gallery, None Whatsoever, Japanese Paintings, Zen Paintings from the Gitter Yellen collection, which opened at Japan Society this past week and will run through June 16th. We hope that many JASA members were able to see the exhibition during Asia Week New York that we're still celebrating, and or some of you may have seen it in its first iteration at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, where the exhibit opened a year ago in February. And now it is my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's special guest speaker, Frank Feltens, a specialist in late medieval Japanese art and as well as early modern Japanese art, who holds a PhD in the field from Columbia University. Frank is a dedicated curator with a broad base of experience and scholarship. He is the Japan Foundation Curator of Japanese Art at the Freer and Sackler Galleries of the Smithsonian Institution, appointed shortly after his very first lecture for JASA, just at the time he was defending his dissertation. And he has since spoken before us in Zooms and in person over these past few years. His dissertation topic, many of you remember, is looking at Korin's paintings and their permutations throughout Japanese culture. And he's written extensively not only on this subject, but many, many others. Prior to his appointment at the National Museum of Asian Art, Frank worked at the Museum for East Asian Art in Berlin, and working on the Rose Hempel collections there, as well as the Klaus Naumann collection, and on several projects in Japan, including a stint as curatorial intern at the Nezu Museum in Tokyo. He also worked at MoMA on the exhibition Tokyo 1955 to 70, A New Avant-Garde. And he is a practitioner of the tea ceremony in the Urosenke tradition and carries the honorary title Sochoku. Frank epitomizes the Japanese curatorial ideal. Not only is he a scholarly researcher and active acquirer for his museum, but he has literally revisited much of the Freer collections, enabling us to look in new ways at that very esteemed collection of Charles Lang Freer. I note particularly his Hokusai exhibition, which opened during the pandemic. He also has steadfastly worked to bring new collections to the museum and to bring young scholars to the museum for appointments for the prestigious Anne Van Bema Fellowship. Please join me this evening for welcoming Frank Feltens, who will speak today on the topic, When Zen Becomes Political. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Amy, so much for this very kind introduction. Much too kind, I think. I'm blushing and I blush very easily. I had already forgotten about many of those things that you cited, so thank you for the reminder as well. But I also want to extend a big thank you to the Japanese Art Society of America for inviting me this afternoon. And it's always a great pleasure and privilege to be back at Japan Society. And I want to especially mention Amy Poster, Alison Tolman, and Victoria Melendez for extending this very kind invitation this afternoon. And yeah, so in my talk today, I'd like to look a little bit at two moments in time, actually, that I think have had a role in forming Zen as sort of a part of Japan's soft power. Both of them are really far removed in time. One is from the 12th century and the other in the 19th. So, but I thought this could be a nice kind of addition to the spectacular exhibition upstairs, none whatsoever, because those works were really made for a very democratic, in a very democratic, very approachable context. And I wanted to add another layer to the story about just about the same time, how Zen became very much political and was used at the very highest strata of society. But I'm sure you're very much aware that every religious movement at one point or another became political or was politicized. Throughout history and across time and space, religious practices and their visual cultures have been employed to foster agendas that go far beyond their original context of faith. Zen was no different in this context. In spite of the common stereotype of Zen and Buddhism writ large as pacifist Stoic religions, their histories are filled with ulterior motives and political navigations, often related to statehood and activism alike. Personal and collective motivations existed alongside and often directly intersected with Zen's history in Japan. At the center of such political rekindling are often artworks, which blend together those differences and different meanings in their lives and afterlives. And always behind any ulterior motives are, of course, people. In this talk, I would like to explore a couple of key moments in the politicization of Zen. After a look at the arrival of Zen in Japan during the 12th century, my focus is on the late Edo period, that is the early to mid 19th century, which were really two of several cataclysmic moments in Japanese history whose impact carries relevance far into the modern concept of Zen. In this context, we will be looking at an interesting moment in time that both coincided with and is different from the works and backgrounds of the painters you can see upstairs in the exhibition None Whatsoever. I thought that a look into Zen's appropriation at the highest political levels might add another layer as you enjoy the Zenga upstairs. And if you haven't already seen the show, I encourage you to really go and see it. Before we move into the Edo period, I would like to take a step back in time, far back in time really, and start at the beginning. That is the beginning of Zen in Japan. As you probably all know already, the idea of Zen, or Chan, as it is known as in my terrible Chinese, was conceived in 5th century China in large parts through the teachings of the monk Bodhidharma, who arrived there from South or Central Asia. The focus on meditation, teacher-student transmission instead of communal debate, monastic precepts, and so on was not entirely new and existed in bits and pieces among other schools of Buddhism prior to Bodhidharma's arrival. Their isolation into a single specific practice, on the other hand, was a new approach that slowly took root by way of remote monasteries and temples established by successive generations of Zen practitioners. And here I just chose an image to illustrate what the Bodhidharma actually looks like for those very few of you who actually don't have an image immediately in your head, I'm sure. Bulging eyes, staring, showing his determination. A steady stream of Japanese monks made their way to China during the Tang Dynasty. By all accounts, they encountered Zen only from the corner of their eyes, flocking to the esoteric Tiantai monastery for spiritual approval and study, and also for gaining a badge of honor that studying in China would bring back home. So studying abroad, basically, it was a seal of approval also when you were returning to Japan, and often came with a lot of privileges. Japanese pilgrims sometimes ran into Chan monks more or less by accident, even though newer research has already shown that Chan or Zen was very politically active already through elite monks and through monasteries in the Tang Dynasty already. But no Japanese monk traveled to China specifically in the Tang Dynasty to study Zen. And there is a quote by the Japanese 9th century monk Ennin, who encountered Zen Chen monks and called them extremely unruly men. And it dismissed them by saying so and went about his business, not seeking any Zen instruction further. And there are several reasons for that dismissal. And at the time, it was really esoteric Buddhism that mattered, since one of the most dominant monasteries in Japan, Enyakuji, in Kyoto, controlled the elite faith system. That was still the case when the monk Yosai, who you see here on the screen on the right with this distinctive head, went to China in the 12th century. Yosai would eventually be credited with bringing back Zen, but did not go to China to do so either. Specifically, the definitive arrival of Zen in Japan is really a story of how accidents can shape the course of history in a really interesting way. When embarking on a second trip to Japan in 1187, Yosai undertook the dangerous crossing with the aim of traveling much further. He departed Japan for a pilgrimage along the important Buddhist sites throughout China and India, the region where the historical Buddha had lived and which, hold a special pull and spiritual appeal to practitioners. Only it appears that the Chinese authorities actually refused Yosai to give a travel permit. So he was only limited to staying in specific, very narrow spaces in China. And like many other Japanese monks before him, went to the great center of Buddhist learning at Mount Tiantai, which is usually the hub that many, if not most, Japanese monks went to study. Like other Japanese monks before him, he encountered Chan monks there who also went there to study. But Yosai was different. He engaged with them and their teachings and eventually carried them back to Japan, and with it also the art of drinking tea. And this is why I included this other image of his treatise on growing and cultivating and drinking and making tea. In Japan, the devastation of the Genpei Civil War between 1180 and 1185 opened an aperture for a great number of new religious movements to take root in Japan. Many temples and monasteries were laid in ruins by the fighting, and the reshuffling of political power from the court to the warrior class triggered a rekindling of cultural identity and Buddhism as soft power. The common story is such that upon seizing political power, the shogunate and regional warriors embraced the newly imported Zen as a cultural and religious touchstone to formulate an identity that was connected but distinctive from that of the imperial court. But as scholars have shown recently, the story is much more complicated than that. New ideas usually do require a lot of time and often move along winding and bumpy paths to take root. In the face of opposition from established Buddhist schools, the Zen embraced in Japan early on became gradually more ecumenical, absorbing aspects of other schools and having monks trained in other traditions enter Zen monasteries. So Zen was kind of already from the start very malleable. But in a lot of ways, it was that syncretism that, along with the rekindling of Japan's religious landscape through civil war, that enabled Zen to become a firm part of Japan's religious and cultural fabric. Against the backdrop of Zen's new role in Japan and with the frequent travels of Zen monks to China and back, and I can't emphasize enough how difficult and dangerous those journeys really were, Zen temples quickly became centers for intelligence and learning about the newest social, political, and cultural trends in China. So they were hubs for learning about this distant place. The coveted knowledge that they assembled helped strengthen the political and cultural position of the shogunate and religious lords who sponsored Zen institutions. So by learning about China, they were able to strengthen their political position and the cultural one as well. The importation and study of Zen was not only religiously motivated, but established an opportunity for accessing intimate knowledge about China writ large. And I'm just, for illustration, I'm showing you here 3 works from our collection at the Smithsonian that we're part of this specific kind of Zen aesthetic ecosystems, and just to give you an idea of what these monasteries look like from the interior. With the prolific travels of monks to China and back, Zen monasteries became something like databases of foreign intelligence that provided access to the most recent news from China. And one of these examples is here on the screen that is by the Japanese painter Shugetsu, who probably produced this long scroll of traveling along the Yangtze River in China on the basis of sketches made by his famous teacher, Sesshu. And these sketches are so detailed and these annotations are so thorough that, it's easy to imagine this being sort of put out and used as a way to understanding the landscape, the architecture, the specific sites, etc. in China at the time. So as a result of all these processes, Zen for centuries was synonymous with learning new trends from a distant trendsetter. The Zen of Yosai and others during the early stages of the Kamakura period formed the backbone for an entire culture that spanned Kyoto, Kamakura, and other regional centers that prompted an enthusiastic collecting of Chinese artworks made in the Zen milieu, and also secular works that were squeezed into the same framework. Over time, Zen became such a deep-rooted part of Japanese culture that it served as the backbone of cultural politics at different points in time. One such moment occurred around the cusp of the 19th century, and this is where I really want to go move into the main part of the talk. So, and this project is a publication of multi-volume set called Shuko Jishu, or Assembled Antiquities in 10 categories. The project was initiated by and led by Matsudaira Sadanobu, a statesman, reformer, and political operator who might be familiar to some of you through Tim and Screech's book, The Shogun's Painted Culture of 2013, just to do a little bit of COVID advertising here. Sadanobu, who you see here in his own self-portrait, was born into the highest strata of the Edo period's political power system. He was the son of a cadet branch of the ruling Tokugawa family, and he presided over Shirakawa domain in today's Fukushima prefecture. When the domain had financial problems to the degree of bankruptcy, he initiated a number of reforms that all but saved the fiefdom from financial ruin. So impactful and innovative were those changes that Sadanobu was tapped to do the same on a national level. Known as the Kansei reforms, or Kansei no Kaikaku, Sadanobu, who was now the chief counselor to the shogun, instituted policies aimed at reducing public spending, building reserves, and deflating the rice market, basically what the White House is doing in many ways today. In doing so, Sadanobu took a radical approach that effectively negated customs and policies of the recent past, but also went against any of the liberal tendencies that marked much of the earlier decades of his time. So he was a reformer and a reactionary at the same time. So Assembled Antiquities, this multi-volume set that he initiated, has a preface dating it to 1800. The set of printed books was a national effort accomplished by a small team. The collection brings together printed reproductions like these line drawings that you see of more than 1,800 artifacts from Japan's past together. So it's meant to be a catalog of Japan's cultural past. The catalog splits them into 10 categories, so hence the name. So those categories are armor, military banners, bows, swords, horse gear, seal impressions, writing implements like brushes and inkstones, rubbings, and portraits, and also old paintings. The final two categories really matter today. They focus on monk portraits and Zen-related pictures. With a total of roughly 6 pieces, these are the only items that could be labeled as paintings or artworks included in Assembled Antiquities. Almost all of them were made in the Zen context. But before taking a closer look at the content, I want to say a few words about the background of Assembled Antiquities and how it came together. Sadanobu had a reputation as a reformer, but his political work actively went against the more relaxed attitude toward foreign trade and the influx of objects from abroad that helped initiate an artistic heyday during the 18th century. So he went against that influence from other places. When looking at the content of these books, it really becomes clear that Sadanobu's project was as reactionary as it was groundbreaking. The catalog, and don't be alarmed or already bored by looking at all this text here, I promise it's the only slide with any, has a preface. This is the preface, or at least part of the preface of the book by the Confucian scholar Hirose Mosai, who was a retainer of Sadanobu in his home domain in Shirakawa. The text provides some interesting motivations about the making and reads surprisingly contemporary, I think. It reads, comparing the elegance of ancient objects and pieces of writing with recent counterparts is a delight. Even when they are copied and handed down like that, they are pleasant to look at during idle hours. My lord Sadanobu enjoys doing this during breaks from political affairs. If there is anyone with even the tiniest love for ancient colors, they should have already brought them all together, so a call for action. But throughout history, there are many calamities, war and fires, and then there is also insect damage. Those pieces that survive to this day amount to only 1 or 2 out of every 1,000. If you should search in distant corners of the country and get a hold of ancient treasures, make a rubbing or a copy and send it to us. Each and every image, word, and character feels like receiving a jewel. To share that joy, we brought them together in this collection called Assembled Antiquities in 10 categories. So the catalog is as much a collection as it is a call for action to its readers, crowdsourcing to satisfy Sadanobu and his group's thirst for ancient objects and to preserve knowledge of fragile cultural artifacts. The project was driven by an idealization of the past. It also embodies a quest for preservation in the face of calamities and natural disasters, which I think is kind of is a very self-reflective and kind of self-aware stance. In short, it conveys a realistic attitude toward the dangers to a work of art. Sadanobu and his team were aware of the evanescence of cultural artifacts, but wanted to create their memory and in their own very specific way. Sadanobu brought a number of loyalists to the project. The painters Tani Buncho, by whom you see two paintings here from two works of art from our collection right here, Ono Senyu and Hakuin, were tasked with producing the paintings from which the printed catalog would be made. Buncho was one of the most prolific and most famous artists of his day. Senyu and Hakuin were both from Sadanobu's home domain of Shirakawa. Both also had a connection to Buncho. Senyu, for example, became the official painter to Sadanobu in the late 1700s, right during the point when he worked on this catalog project. Hakuin was a monk from the Pure Land school of Buddhism and ran a temple in Shirakawa domain. So clearly Sadanobu kept this national project within a really tightly knit circle of Shirakawa loyalists or buddies, I think. The monk Hakuin, he also helped paint some of these sketches in the book, apprenticed at a school founded by Buncho called the Tower of Copying Mountains, Shazando. There he learned how to paint from life, which was a relatively recent technique aimed at more faithfully capturing what is directly before your eyes instead of capturing your own interpretation of it. This practice involved Western painting techniques like shading and one-point perspective. Sadanobu and his group employed these techniques for military intelligence gathering. Such training and reconnaissance work preceded the compilation of Assembled Antiquities and directly led to it. In 1793, Sadanobu and Buncho went on a trip to Sagami and Izu to the south of today's Tokyo to survey coastal defenses in the wake of an increasingly weakened shogunate. Buncho's task was to capture key places visited during their journey, and the results of them you see here in copies by Hakuin. So these are basically their snapshots made during this reconnaissance journey to survey the coastlines. The trip and its visual record directly informed the work for Assembled Antiquities a few years later. The catalog was effectively also another reconnaissance project aimed at locating and cataloging cultural patrimony, both for personal enjoyment and also for national record keeping. Led by one of the most influential politicians of the day, the project was both an exercise in statehood, cultural governance, as well as a personal vanity project that corresponded with a craze for antiquities in Japan at the turn of the 19th century. Buddhist objects often played a part in there. A few years after Assembled Antiquities was compiled, a number of smaller and mostly private surveys of a similar kind took place. For example, a painted hand scroll in the collection of Sensoji, a temple in Tokyo, records what amounts to a scientific study of a Buddhist sculpture. Around the year 1814, a team of collectors and artists in Edo drilled a hole in the bottom of a Tibetan sculpture, the one that you see right here, in order to uncover votive objects in its interior before documenting the entire process in a lavish painted scroll. And this is just a tiny section of it. The scroll includes images of the sculpture alongside a long description of the procedure on paper decorated by Sakai Hoitsu, an artist whose work I think many of you might still be familiar with from the 2012 exhibition here at Japan Society. So this right here is one of many efforts to survey domestic and imported works of religious and secular art around that time. Assembled Antiquities, however, was by far the largest project prior to the modern age and had by far the biggest impact after. Not much is known about the circumstances and the criteria for compiling the catalog, or even how the 1,800 works included were selected. It was probably a combination of deliberate choices, levels of access, and pure coincidence that determined the content, at least of the volumes with Zen artworks included. The painters involved went on at least 2 known journeys around Japan to survey works for the catalog. They clearly didn't gain access to every important temple or private collection, and likely didn't even know the location of a good number of works, creating an automatic pre-selection of their catalog. Once access was granted, the monks and collectors probably pulled out Zen works both on demand and at random, resulting in a hodgepodge of pieces from a limited number of collections. For example, Kyoto Zen temples like Nanzenji, Tofukuji, and Daitokuji have the most pieces included, whereas the famous Zen repositories elsewhere, like the Kamakura Monastery, Kenshoji, have 0. The focus is on the old Gozan system of Kyoto, a group of major Zen monasteries established in the imperial capital during the Kamakura period. The selection really, to me, feels like going to Japan and only going to the Tokyo National Museum and building your own image of Japan on the basis of that experience alone. The volumes containing Zen-related paintings are labeled simply famous old paintings. The first few images were Buddhist paintings from the famous Zen monastery Tofukuji, which was founded by Eni Bennen in 1236, who was a student of the Yosai who brought Zen to Japan and also brought udon, is credited with bringing udon noodles to Japan. In perfect catalog fashion, each image comes with a caption detailing the owner of a work, in this case Tofukuji, their location, Kyoto, the subject, simply triad here, and the artist, if known, who is without credited at least here, and also the size, which I omitted, or at least here you can still see the size, just to give people, readers, a sense of the dimensions as well, who couldn't see the real thing. The reproductions, of course, are also not true to size, so I think including the dimensions also was intended to give the works context and plasticity, and also show that these artists really went to see these works. The triad of the historical Buddha Shakyamuni here underscores the role of the Buddha's life story in Zen teachings. Another pillar of Zen practice and visual culture are the paintings from Daitokuji that follow here. Just like the Tofukuji Shakyamuni triad, the Daitokuji triptych is also attributed to the fabled Tang Dynasty Chinese painter Wu Daozi from the 7th century. Wu Daozi had no known Zen affiliation, but works associated with his authorship, whether authentic or in most cases carried the cultural gravitas of a storied moment in Chinese culture, the reign of Emperor Xuanzong, who was very popular in Japanese painting, capturing stories of his life. Sadanobu and his team tapped into that layered history by incorporating his works into their repository of Japan's cultural past. The following 3 images are probably some of the most iconic works from medieval Zen collections. The painting of a dove is attributed to the Sung Emperor Huizong, whose posthumous identity was tied to his fate as the last emperor of the northern Sung and as a revered painter and calligrapher. Huizong was not a Zen painter also, but his works were incorporated into the Japanese Zen universe, where they took outsized roles. The original dove painting is now in a private collection, but previously existed in the orbit of the Ashikaga shoguns, known as the owners of one of the most revered and storied Japanese collections. So Ashikaga provenance was very extremely sought after. Many of the works linked to the Ashikaga and the artistic culture they informed were heavily inspired by Zen. So this, and here the cartouche on the right side mentions Soami as the owner. Soami is another layer of amazing provenance in this work. His role as one of the keepers of the storied Ashikaga collections and his work as a painter made his name carry almost mythical weight. Such legendary provenance produced cultural bedrocks whose potency Sadanobu clearly understood for this project. Listed along votive images like the Shakyamuni triads and other works linked directly to religious practice, the provenance and impact of secular works like this one showcase how the artistic cultures of Zen early on had expanded beyond matters of faith into larger cultural and political ideas and paradigms. And I couldn't resist to but include this one, which I think many of you remember, maybe if this is especially true for these two next paintings that are today considered iconic examples of Zen's global visual culture. I think to many of you, persimmons and chestnuts might be familiar through a really groundbreaking exhibition at the San Francisco Asian Art Museum late last year, which provided what I really think is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see these amazing, teeny tiny, but amazing paintings in our lifetimes outside Japan. The two paintings are iconic in the history of Japanese Zen from the time they came to the country in the 1500s into the present day. The New York Times even went so far as to call them the Zen Mona Lisa, and that's a cringy title, but it kind of embodies that the importance that these works embody and the stories they carry. So, and the label here, talks about the owner, Daitokuji, but it labels them as sweets, which I find really interesting that they are labeled as candy or kashizu. The label highlights really, which is so different from how they are being referred to today. The label highlights the edible nature of the subjects depicted. In that way, they follow a long-held tradition of Zen pictures that depict edible subjects ranging from chestnuts to radishes. These humble subjects that were harvested for human consumption and pleasure really pose a conundrum that is at the heart of Zen's particular practice. How do you stop yourself from eating tasty things? In this case, attachment to them is what you would want to avoid as a practitioner. Chestnuts and persimmons were by no means everyday food and remind us that cravings are always part of the human condition, I think. But together with Huizong's dove, persimmons and chestnuts are the only paintings in assembled antiquities that come with information other than owner, maker, and size. The name Soami is mentioned again, and this time as the author of the work's title, signaling that the paintings went through the famous medieval curator's hands as well. But what is more, the works come with a letter by Sen no Rikyu, known for his role in shaping Japanese tea culture, indicating again that the paintings went through the hands of another famous tastemaker in Japanese Zen-inspired culture. Sadanobu and his team express an awareness of the importance that Zen had in shaping what at this time, at Sadanobu's time, had become parts of orthodox Japanese culture. His selection shows the continuing foundational importance of Zen's artistic movement. Modern scholars have argued that the iconic role of these two paintings, and persimmons in particular, is owed mainly by the reaction of modernist artists toward their simplicity. But I would argue that it was national efforts that, like assembled antiquities, that helped resurface these works at the end of the early modern period and helped embed them into a wider conversation that enabled their impact during the 20th century. In some ways, the listing in assembled antiquities foreshadows the romanticizing notions associated, especially with persimmons during the 20th and 21st centuries. The way in which the work's provenance is also highlighted is unique in the catalog and draws attention to a piece of art that would eventually gain global recognition. The catalog lists it not as an embodiment of Zen philosophy, but as an artifact of historical national importance, whose cultural role is manifest through the project's premise and the lineup of works next to it, meaning these the Buddhist votive objects next to it. On the following pages also are such other major pieces like Muji's Crane and Gibbons, also at Daitokuji, famous Zen paintings. So these works here on the screen and Huizong's Dove are designated as national treasures by the Japanese government, and persimmons and chestnuts are important cultural properties. So alongside its peers in the catalog, these works help define parts of Japanese cultural identity and are being recognized by the government as such. Underlying the production of assembled antiquities was also the premise of transparency and access. Many of the works featured, whether they are arms, armor, or artworks, were in private ownership or temple collections that were off limits to most people. Statesmen, commoners, and artists alike had very few opportunities to ever see them. Sadanobu, likely, given his elite status and his kind of political leanings, I think didn't really intend this project to provide access to the masses, but it was definitely a side effect. Ever the political operator in a project of that scale, Sadanobu's aim was clearly to survey and capture some of Japan's cultural assets. The level of access resonated and helped assembled antiquities retain an important role into the modern age, especially during the Meiji era and after. The catalog was reprinted several times in the modern age, for example, in 1892, 1904, and 1908, just during the time when Japan formulated its national cultural preservation efforts and started taking stock of its own cultural heritage. So, but why were there so many Zen paintings in this national project? The catalog was clearly not a religious endeavor. Its production did not involve Zen monks or even Zen practitioners. Neither Sadanobu nor any member of his team were known for their Zen faith or practice. But the project simply highlights an awareness of Zen's role in the cultural identity of late Edo period politics, in the soft power of Japan at the time, at that time, and just as it is now. The compilers of assembled antiquities considered Zen temples as repositories, as effective time capsules of Japan's cultural history. That understanding inflects the earlier role of Zen monasteries as centers for collecting and accessing the newest information on China. Most of the paintings in assembled antiquities are Chinese Zen paintings that had come to Japan centuries earlier through the foreign trade and monastic exchange championed by warrior rulers, and interestingly, the kind of trade that Sadanobu tried to curb in his own time. These works had an outsized impact on the evolution of Japanese painting for centuries after, a role that Sadanobu and his team were very much aware of. The majority of assembled antiquities focuses on rulership and power, with bronze mirrors as symbols of the imperial line and portraits of emperors from Japanese history being paired with images of renowned warriors, such as Taira no Kiyomori, who's a little guy right here. When looking at the sum of its parts, it becomes clear that Assembled Antiquities was a project that attempted to read Japanese cultural history through the lens of a declining but still powerful elite. The artistic culture of Zen, by its historic association with warrior patronage and its tremendous impact on the evolution of the visual arts in Japan, was a natural touchstone for this project. The project of state coincided roughly with the latter phase of a movement to popularize Zen through the works of Hakuin, Sengai, and others featured in the exhibition None Whatsoever upstairs. Their approach to Zen was also political. it was a sort of counterculture to the official party line found in assembled antiquities right here. Both movements showcase how Zen was a popular and easily malleable aspect of domestic soft power. 100 years or so later, Zen entered the international stage and proved just as popular and as malleable as it had been to Hakuin and also Matsudaira Sadanobu. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Feltens, for your wonderful lecture. I'm Victoria Melendez, the incoming president of Japanese Art Society of America. After a 5-minute break, we will get back together for a very brief annual meeting, and I will report on JASA events. Thank you. Okay. So without further ado, I thought I would convene this very brief annual meeting. So first of all, good evening and happy Year of the Dragon. I hope your 2024 has started auspiciously and has plenty of Japanese art in your plans. We thank Dr. Frank Feltens again for his fascinating lecture on Zen and how it has played a part in Japan's soft and hard power for centuries. 2023 was JASA's 50th anniversary, and members celebrated with our groundbreaking 50th anniversary exhibition entitled Meiji Modern 50 Years of New Japan. This exhibition opened to great fanfare at the Asia Society Museum in New York on October 3rd, and by the time the show closed on January 7th, more than 14,000 people had passed through the galleries. A beautiful exhibition catalog has also been published to accompany the exhibition and is available for purchase via the JASA website. If you don't already have a copy, please do consider getting one, as it really is a wonderful and scholarly publication. Meiji Modern now moves to Chicago, where it will open tomorrow at the Smart Museum of Art at the University of Chicago, and then on to the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston on July 7th. As was the case in New York, there will be an array of lectures and events related to the show at both venues. These include a recently announced JASA organized trip to Chicago from May 3rd to May 6th to visit the exhibition, attend a symposium at the University of Chicago, and visit private collections and the Art Institute of Chicago. We hope that you can consider participating in this trip, which is limited to 25. We also celebrated our 50th anniversary by launching our first ever capital campaign called Securing Our Future to raise funds to support the Meiji Modern exhibition and also to build a strong foundation for JASA's future, including an endowment to support impressions and also new initiatives to support rising scholars in Japanese art history. We're happy to report that thus far, we've raised close to $900,000, or about 1/3, about $2.5 million long-term goal. Most of this has gone to support Meiji Modern. We hope that you will consider supporting this campaign to help promote our other initiatives to further Japanese art appreciation and scholarship. Now I'd like to move on to more mundane business and the results of the proxy ballot for the re-election of 2 current board members and the election of 2 new board members. The 2 directors re-elected for another 3-year term are Professor Max Moorman and Dr. Rachel Saunders. The 2 new directors added to the board are Shoko Aono, the director of the Poto Gallery, and Midori Oka, associate director of the Mary Griggs Burke Center for Japanese Art at Columbia University. I can't see them in the audience right now because I'm on stage, but can Aono-san and Oka-san please stand up for our participants? Thank you again for joining the JASA board. We're really looking forward to your participation and input and insights. For the remainder of 2024, as you probably saw from our January announcement, our program committee has been very busy organizing monthly webinars and in-person museum and gallery visits. We hope that you can participate in some of them. We've recently announced 2, an in-person gallery visit on March 26th and also a live webinar on April 3rd. Finally, and this is the Oscars part, I'd like to express my thanks not only to the members of the JASA board for their service, but also to JASA's membership coordinator, Cheryl Gall, our webmaster, Cheryl Solimini, former JASA president, Susan Peters, for her many years of work on the JASA newsletter, from which she is retiring, and to Allison Tolman, who is terming off the board, but who will thankfully remain an active member of the program committee and as an advisor to the board. And I'd like to express my sincere thanks to Impressions editor Julia Meach, design and production manager Marjorie Cantor, and Impression sales manager Christy Ledlaw. Their work enables you to receive this extraordinary and very singular production. And of course, our heartfelt thanks goes to all of you whose generosity makes it possible for JASA to do so much. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Goodbye.